Shall we get going? Thank you. All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Center for Architecture. I'm Cami Altman. I co-chair the AIA New York Design for Aging Committee alongside Brian Pape. Our committee is dedicated to addressing the needs of the aging population within urban settings. We meet on the third Thursday of every month to explore design challenges, develop universal design recommendations, increase public awareness, and provide education across various professions to create a more age-friendly cityscape. Our members include individuals from diverse professional backgrounds, not just architects. So if you're interested in joining us and learning more about our committee, feel free to visit aiany.org/committee/design for aging. And Rosalind is here from the Women in Architecture. If you wanted to say a few words.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. I'm the co-chair for the Women in Architecture Committee. My co-chair, Wells, is regrettably not here tonight, but she sends a hello. And so when Design for Aging Committee came to Women in Architecture for this specific event, we were so thrilled to co-host because, as you can see, we have an all-women panel. And one of the goals and the mission statement of the Women in Architecture Committee is to promote women in leadership through mentorship, through licensing, through networking. It's not just of architects, it's of architecture and the allied industries. So we have, interior designer, we have owner rep here. So we're really pleased to be co-hosting with Design for Aging, and thank you for approaching us to co-host. And back to you.
Yeah. Well, before we get started, I do want to thank the AIA New York staff and directors for their invaluable support in making and organizing this event. I also want to express our appreciation to Rosalind for co-hosting and providing her guidance in bringing this event to fruition. So tonight's event, Designing for an Aging Population, a Female Perspective, owes its genesis to one of our most active committee members, Chai Huang, an architect with a profound dedication for designing for aging populations. Among many things, Chai played a pivotal role in developing the committee's special project, the Aging in Place Guide for Building Owners, a collaborative effort with New York City's Department of Aging, published in 2016, and now available in English, Spanish, and Mandarin. This guide, accessible on our website if you're interested, remains a cornerstone of our committee's work, so thank you for that, Chai. And now, without further ado, I'll pass Chai the baton to introduce our esteemed guests and lead what promises to be a truly enlightening discussion. Thank you.
Intimate setting, yes.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Jai from AIA New York Design for Aging Committee, and we're very happy to have this event with AIA New York Women in Architecture Committee. So, what is design for aging, and who is designing these spaces? Kami already answered the question about what is design for aging. Then who are the professionals designing these spaces? So over the years, we found that the female designers are growing in numbers, from technical designers, interior designers, project managers, project architects, studio leaders, VPs, to business owners. And fabric is also changing in this industry because more females are now executive directors, CEOs and CFOs of senior resident service providers in care communities. So how does the growth in female professionals reflect in the senior living and care environment? I think the impact of the shift has already created a transformation in whose voices are being heard. So today, we are highlighting the growing voices of these female professionals who are focusing on design for aging. We are very happy to have Valerie Montebro from Perkins Eastman and Gail Ressler from Gail Ressler Interior Design and Suzanne Wright from Self-Help Realty Group. We're sorry to miss Darcy Connors today because she got sick, but we would definitely invite her back when we get a chance to learn about her amazing story. And so for this very awesome female professionals, we're going to ask them, what does their career path look like? How or when did they start designing spaces for aging? What's their perspective when they first start approaching the project? And how do they set up the design goals that's impacting the end user? What are they the most excited about in their work? And how do they harness this passion as a fuel to their work and to create a place for themselves to embrace their skills and to set them apart from the crowd? And also, what advice do they have for the other professionals? I think these experiences are important for everyone to hear. And also, there are some common issues with product, like how is our industry doing? What are we doing right? And what do we need to keep improving? And most importantly, how can we continue to positively impact design for aging? Let's welcome our first presenter, Valerie.
Doing some pictures for fun here. Well, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I was excited to be invited, and I'm excited to talk about a lot of those issues. There was a lot that we discussed when we got together, and I don't know that I can answer all of those questions, but I thought I would just sort of start with where it all started when I got my Master's of Architecture to an emerging professional. Some of you may see have the age of the computer behind me. Sort of shocking. A former colleague of mine recently said that, and this is, I'm already sick of seeing this. I have been practicing in New York. I'm a native New Yorker, a rare breed, for almost 28 years. Let's go next. I am a person that, my father was an engineer, so the apple, I guess, didn't fall that far from the tree. And he actively discouraged me away from engineering. But I always loved beautiful places and spaces and the effect that spaces can have on people. So these are some icons. I'm sure everybody is familiar with Grand Central. I go through there every day. I think that's a glass house. TWA, I still have to get there now that it's open again, and Frank Lloyd Wright. So, thinking about how do you bring in light? How do you connect to the outdoors? How do we create spaces where people can connect? So that's, that's where my passion for architecture, I think, started. There are also a lot of personal influences that I had in my life. These are not the best photos, but I was lucky enough to have 2 matriarchs in my family that lived to be 100. They taught, in observing them, taught me a lot about aging, how to age with grace, how to age, and have a good time and be intellectually curious. The older they got, their infirmities were also on display. And you can see my grandmother in the middle there, she had macular degeneration, so she often had a visor because things were too bright for her all the time. Things that are not bright for the rest of us in this room were bright for her. So she always had a visor on. This is quite an old photo because those are my nephews. And the one on the left just had a baby, so now I'm the great aunt. And this, so there's the old, there's also the young. I am a mother of 2 boys that just turned 14 last week, and this is a recent photo of us in Italy. Got them out of the country for the first time, and it was fun to start their architectural education. So I think, aside from being a lover of beautiful spaces and things, I also, everybody has as part of their DNA the experiences of their life that shape their personal things that shape how they think about things. So, I didn't come to architecture thinking that I was going to be designing different types of residential environments for the elderly. And I included this just because I think a lot of people in the room that are architects go to school because you love design, but there's so much else that's involved in design. And I think that's probably a small part of what I currently do, which is manage projects. And I enjoy thinking about how all the pieces come together to create the environments that we collaborate on. So I'm going to run through a few projects. This is a project that I did at the first architecture firm I worked for right out of school, St. Joseph's Home for the Blind. The sister there approached us and said, we need to get the beauty shop out of the basement. And somehow my principal in charge convinced her to do a whole new addition because what they had were 4 bedded rooms, no private toilets, and we built what was then a state-of-the-art nursing home. And I learned a lot on this project. I learned not only about constructability issues, I learned a lot about the neighborhood concept and how you break spaces down, how the difference between public and private. That is one of the nursing rooms, the sort of toe-to-toe configuration for shared rooms so that every person can have personal space, and how to age gracefully. There was also a lot I learned in terms of obviously codes and visual acuity. We had some patterning on the floor and being careful about, how does the aged eye see things differently than you and I see things. So, and then I also had the opportunity at a previous firm, some of my colleagues are here, to work on an independent day school in New York. So why am I showing you this? Because this project also had a lot of the same issues that we discuss in our work. So, how does each portion of the school have its own identity? Similar to neighborhoods and smaller pods that we create in senior living design. These are residential facilities. None of us live in gigantic buildings. We come from homes, so how do you create smaller neighborhoods and pieces within a larger building? How do you create public spaces and private spaces? Something that's obviously very different is the level of visual excitement, which is not something that we often incorporate into senior living. So these are a few, that's sort of, I just bring those projects up as reference. I've worked on projects throughout my career that I've worked on healthcare, corporate interiors, residential design, senior living, schools. I'm sure I'm missing something along the way. But I think all of these things filter into our work. This is a project that our firm has been working on for more than 10 years. It used to be known as Hebrew Home for the Aged, if some of you are native New Yorkers, and it is a large campus in Riverdale, which we're about to build this building here, which is part of phase 1.
This will be independent living, even though the majority of the campus is assisted living and nursing. And that will help to, it'll be the first life plan or CCRC in New York City. So that will give New Yorkers an opportunity for a different kind of living environment. And you know, I think some of the things that we thought about, in addition to the amenity spaces and how to organize it, I don't have any plans tonight to get into the details, but I think, you know, one of the key features of this was sort of the response to the landscape. The Hudson River is along the left here where Susan's Hand is, and being able to orient the building so that everybody can engage in the view. So views out to the landscape, being in the landscape, having walking paths, and being connected with nature. This is a view of the entry court, and this is in the back. So having outdoor spaces, you know, creating spaces for seniors to be out in the landscape, or if maybe they're more fragile, be out, but be in a more contained outdoor space where they feel safe. I've also, since I've been at Perkins Eastman, had the opportunity to work on an addition to the Elizabeth Seton Children's Center, which is a pediatric nursing home. So people think nursing homes are just for elders, but you know, this, for me, was sort of a nexus between designing for an age population and a population that you know, has to meet all the requirements of nursing, but for kids. These are kids that are very developmentally disabled. They have a lot of, they're fragile medically, sorry. And you know, this is sort of the continuation of not just how do you live in a residential environment with a roommate as an old person or an elderly person and have your own space, but how does that translate for children? And you know, maybe this one is much more open, this toe-to-toe configuration for more interaction. Also, this classroom I think is just as happy as the ones we did at Heschel. This is another project out on Long Island where there is an existing, there's an existing nursing home. Perkins Eastman added an assisted living building one more time. And then they just completed, maybe 2 years ago, the independent living piece. This project was all about being able to provide multiple levels of continuing care. And I think that part of the unique, similar to River's Edge, part of the unique thing about this project was the landscape and being able to provide walking paths uninterrupted by vehicular traffic and providing views out to these ponds and meeting spaces, which are almost like outdoor rooms. I think what we've learned is a lot of seniors don't necessarily like being up high, but creating views and vistas and places for them to wander and walk and discover. So this is a recent project. I can't take credit for any of this, but it's always nice to be invited back by a client who asked us to come and do a feasibility study to add more assisted living. The reason I show this is as sort of a dichotomy to the previous two projects, which are for independent seniors. This is a not-for-profit, mission-based organization who cares for, in a campus nearby, developmentally disabled youth. Then, as they age, this is a location. They have a very unique model. They follow the teachings of Rudolf Steiner, right angles in their architecture, very specific about colors. So, designing a place for people to be that reflects the values of not just what we know about as architects about how to create residential spaces, but also the values of the organizations themselves. So we're looking forward to seeing what develops there. And then this is back to more independent living, just sort of showing, taking advantage of views and being connected to nature, either up high with there's a lot of discussion about that handrail that got put in so that it doesn't block the view, but if somebody's out there feeling safe, and not close to the edge, versus being down low, creating sort of a living room space, or creating a living room space inside so that you can be cozy but have your connection outside. So I think, every project is different. And I think, these are sort of all the phases of life. I'm sort of dismayed to see I'm closer to this end at this point. But, these have been my guiding principles, I think, from the beginning, in terms of creating spaces that are good for everybody. Good for people if you're 80 or if you're 8, because people come together. Grandparents live in assisted living, or they live in a nursing home, or they live in independent living, but they have family. And so how do you create a space that feels like home, where people are comfortable, and also responds to the needs of the organization that is putting the project together, so the residents and the operators. And these ideas that sort of struck me when I was younger and pushed me into architecture have not changed, and get reflected in our work over and over. So that's that.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gail Ressler, and I am a sole practitioner, interior designer, and a high proportion of my work is for clients who are older. One of the things that, the terminology, I still get stuck on it because everyone is aging, and that is terminology that is important in the way that it reflects how we realize that we are not designing for them, we are designing for us, and not just those of us further down that continuum, but truly everyone. So thank you to the Center for Architecture and our committees. I got very involved with the AIA Design for Aging Committee after I left the world of corporate design, after about half my career doing lots of millions of square feet of workstations, and it was a good thing for me. And I kind of came full circle to something that I had been interested in even in my college years. I did a senior project that was actually designed for accessibility, was what I called it then. And I think that I was really more focused on people with disabilities. When I found the AIA's Design for Aging Committee and was happy that they were welcoming non-architects to participate, I got very involved in this project which we called Blooming Boroughs, which I want to plug a little bit even after the fact, because it really was a terrific collaboration. This slide on the left is the exhibit for Blooming Boroughs, some of which those boards are actually in my apartment now, and somehow I thought that they were going to be used somewhere. So I thought it was kind of funny that I was going to project video on this. What our concept was to look at aging in New York City, make it more age-friendly, and take on the idea of aging in place. We started with a charrette, which was an all-day program that was really quite wonderful, talking with all the stakeholders, including older adults, but also all the professionals that you see here on this crazy matrix. And, you know, where I live and work is up in the left corner as an interior designer who often works with architects and is also an adult child of older parents. And then I co-chaired with Herb Oppenheimer the high-rise buildings portion of the project. And we were really very aspirational about public housing. And it's a module that's repeated so often and frankly is such a failure for older adults, people with disabilities. So we came up with some ideas, including an outdoor shared community space, a sort of porch space. We went through and reconfigured the ground floor because we understand that the elevators are just going to not work all the time. And the stories we heard were really so moving about how people, you know, they'd miss a court date because they couldn't get downstairs. And you can only imagine all the other medical appointments and so forth. So we thought reconfiguring to the ground floor would be a good idea. And as the interior designer person, I got very involved with how could we also furnish this space. I think one of the things that interior designers do and are focused on is merging the built environment and the loose elements. You know, we decided to do partitions that were movable, that would be the closets, so that you could reconfigure it, have a little bit more independence and authority over your own environment. And we put together a report that you know, is still accessible. I've probably linked on the website about our recommendations. Unfortunately, it's very, very difficult to budge an entity of that size and with all that political story behind it when they're trying to heat the building and they can't necessarily achieve that. And I'm not dissing each of the people that we worked with were really interested, as were the residents, but it's moving a very big ship. And we were probably a little too small an entity to get too far, but perhaps we can loop that back around sometime. Then a little bit more about my own business, which I started, I think, in 2003. And it was really just kind of revisiting my interests of working with clients more closely and having more of a relationship with the client, and feeling more acknowledged. You know, I mean, corporate work is what it is, and I really enjoyed it while I was doing it, but you know, there's only so many times you want to repeat those kinds of elements because they're not personally all that satisfying, at least speaking for myself. So I came up with for well-being. So, you know, I just wanted to speak to the fact that I really have a relationship with my clients that's very unique with each one. And as I think the only one on the panel who's doing really, you know, residential work now, I think that's been the biggest flip from working in larger scale things. And the one on the left is my mom, so so I have the most longevity on that particular older adult, but you know, each of them really brought out something very different in what we were doing. Maybe later if we talk about COVID, I think you have that as a question later. I'll talk about what it was like living with my parents for 2 months. It was a PhD, I'll tell you. So I wanted to just jump into this project, which is really my most recent project, just getting finished up. And on the left, you see what we found, which is what the developer put in. And on the right is the kind of small changes we made. But you can see she's very petite, and reaching the handheld shower, although you have one, it was kind of pointless. And all we had to do was add a bracket, so it was a very simple thing. Much to my complete astonishment, and there was a glass shelf in the shower, which I thought, you really don't have to be any kind of aging expert. That's really a bad idea. So that's gone, and we have grab bar, at the threshold, and then one of those basket-y things that's also a grab bar at the back, keeps it all neat and, much more cheerful. I was looking for these slides, they kind of partly portray the story, so I'll tell you about it. I had a client that was an older couple. He was very tall, she was very petite. She had some lung issue, breathing, and then she had a number of health issues. So it was an interesting, I thought of this right away as a student project, because how do you accommodate such opposite needs in their own residence? And we were lucky because they had a house, and we were able to make a shower in one part of the bathroom and a tub in the other. But I think it's really important to realize that, when you're designing for that one person or two, there's a lot to juggle in that, and you try to anticipate everything. And then the woman ended up getting her leg amputated during the course of the project, and so we had a whole lot to consider, but we had done pretty well, and that worked out well for them. Also, I should say that the reason I start with bathrooms, unglamorous as they are, is I had even written it down for myself because the numbers were astonishing me. The number of, something like 80% of the falls that happen at home happen in the bathroom. So really, if you're gonna brush up your expertise in one area for the aging, just learn how to get the bathroom right. No glass shelves in the shower. And then the kitchen is also, a really high priority residential issue. And I just pulled these three because I thought they kind of showed that I really don't have any one way to put this together. It's based on who the client is, what all the circumstances are, and how they come to the fore. On the left, that's a real city-sized kitchen. A couple was moving his elderly mother from the west side to the east side to be nearer to them, which I thought was really remarkable, but clearly I didn't understand how long it took to get across town, and it made total sense to me later on. So they bought this apartment for her and a live-in caregiver, and I really had no budget, which was lovely. So we did a very nice, small space for that. Some of the just little things are just getting shelves above the counter where you can reach without opening a door. The height is not something that would be optimal, but it was such a small space, and since there was someone living there with the elder woman, it was fine. The second one was another small kitchen. It was a project that I did for someone, the woman who was sitting on the sofa in the previous slide, who was being moved into what was a very large studio, and we adapted the apartment to have a little bit more privacy as a one-bedroom so that an aide could sleep in the living room, and that worked out very well for her. Kind of simple and straightforward. And the last one was just a couple who had their adult son living with them. He was from the island somewhere, and when I went in to meet with them, there was color everywhere. It was really fabulous because, you work in an architecture firm, there's a lot of white and gray. So it was really fun for me to try and express that in a way that kind of balanced out. And they had a lot of stuff to store, so we also went high up, but I think their adult son would be the one to reach up to there. This one is a large kitchen, so the opposite end of the scale, in a brownstone that hadn't been renovated in like 45 years, and it was cream-colored laminate. So the client was really ready for a big change, and she really wanted something really modern and slick and clean, which was fascinating because her living room was Victorian. Just not what I expected. And you know, it worked out really well. It had her personality in it. On the left image, you can see just in front of that, between the doorway, there was a little area that we called Dot's Bar. So I thought it was a good fun chance to make a joke about Design for Aging isn't just grab bars, it's actual bars. So, you know, she loved it. She entertains and has that little area where her son-in-law will mix cocktails, and when she has her events, because she has a lot of people in her home, that can be put to work. This one will look familiar to somebody back here who's contractor for this job. But this is just getting finished now, and what I wanted to talk about was how you take it and just make those little adaptations to make it work. This kitchen had a peninsula, which was narrow and, you know, not very nice looking, with bar stools. So, you know, the first day we spoke about bar stools, and it was like, you're never going to use those, are you? Like, do you want them for your grandkids? Just, no. So we decided we'd put cabinets in. So the second shot, you can see the skeleton of the cabinets, that then you could see the finished ones on the right. So we changed the top from black granite, which was dated looking and kind of heavy, to what you see on the right. And it worked out really well, because now instead of having, you know, a real shortage of storage space, there's an abundance and it's reachable. And this is the same client that couldn't reach the shower head, so she can't reach, you know, even just pretty much past the bottom of the upper shelf. So in the glass cabinet, we put just display stuff. And then if you look to, you know, that's the same space, and just looking further to the left. You know, a lot of objects, but trying to organize them for a client to be not appearing to be cluttery, and simple furnishings and open space. So I think that's going to work out very well for her. This client, different kind of priorities, big readers. They had a ton of paper, and what we did was we did this long built-in L. So I just envied their file space after I read it, because it was really a tremendous achievement to have the clutter put away. And I could talk for 20 minutes about just clutter and how problematic that is, particularly for seniors. But you can see there's a lot here and a lot of books and art and so forth, but we snuck it in a way that worked really well for them. And they had a lot of involvement in different causes, so they would have people come to the house, so this doubled as a good seating area. This one just, you know, to show you a living room space that could be for any age. You know, I think my goal is to never make it look like, you know, you're walking in someone's home, but it's, you know, obviously old people live here. You know, nobody really wants that. And, you know, it kind of minimalist. I think the other thing that I pulled this one for was, one of the things that happens a lot is pulling things, having to mix new elements with older elements. So this couple had a house in New Jersey, and a small apartment in the city, and then they gave up the house. So some of this furniture came from there, and we pulled it all together. Actually, that wasn't the final coffee table. We had something made that was a little more unique. But anyway, you get the sense of the space that it's pretty elegant and kind of architecturally sensitive, I would say, nothing crazy about it. I touched on it a little bit, artwork and photos. I just wanted to talk about it because when you think about having photos in your home yourself, you might have one or two of your dog or your grandmother or something. But I'm finding that the photo walls, or however one organizes the photos, it becomes really, really important because it reminds them of their lives and makes them feel good about themselves and all these people in their lives. And they're typically coming from somewhere. Like my clients have always had hundreds of them everywhere. So they didn't really get to enjoy the photos. They were just there because each time you get a new one, you add and you never take away. So I've become a good editor at that, and then supplement it with putting some things in albums so that they can get into the new space. Sometimes this client's better at throwing things away than I am, so it just depends. And the art, I think, is just, if you have a different personality and you're not all about your grandkids and you have, that's the same room with the books, just facing the other way. She has an amazing art collection, and it was fun to get to display that, and some of these clients, I've done some projects more than once for them because it seems to be a pattern. I hadn't thought about it until preparing for this today, but I have at least 3 clients where I did their original space, and then in this case their husbands passed away, and then they either moved or redid what they had. So it's nice to have that longevity of relationship. The kitchen that's very minimalist, she lives with her son who has autism and is an adult, and I ran into her the other day on the bus, and I was just thinking of you because of something. And she said, I think of you every day because every day Sam comes into the kitchen and says, Mom, I love this kitchen. And I was just like, I never got that in the corporate world. So it was just really a fun, lovely thing. And then just, some words of reminders. When doing the residential aging in place work, identify the individual needs and their support systems. Sometimes the client themselves can't really tell you everything you need to know, so you have to reach out to the family when it's appropriate. Things that will affect what we do is vision, strength, mental acuity, auditory capability, that one almost all the time, and mobility, social support. I will say with auditory, I just think of my experience with my parents who were in their 90s during COVID, and the telephone thing. There's a thing with my mother where I say, she's like, what? I can't hear you. Did you put it on speaker? Oh yeah. And that's the magic word. You have to remind her to put it on speaker, and then she hears just fine. But it's the same little things that can make all the difference. Mobility, of course, is huge. The devices and the issues about what's the floor finish. Is it going to work with a walker? Is there a rug? You're going to catch the edge, or all the details. And then social support, because I would say that aging in place is definitely not for everyone. It's not for people who have not planned to do it well. You don't just stay in your house or apartment without making plans and it suddenly will all resolve all the problems you've had. there will be problems if you don't work on it. So I liken it to, a financial plan, that if you don't have one, it will find you and it will bite you. So it's important to think about it when it's still easy to think about it. I know that we never know who's gonna have a disability. It's just impossible. So try to say, well, if this, then that. Social support, I think, pretty self-explanatory. Safety, I mentioned, fall prevention, especially bathrooms and kitchens. Visitability. Thought I had a slide for that, but somehow I didn't. It's an important issue to, there it is.
You didn't see that.
I don't know how that. But, I think even when you have your client and you know your client well, what you want to do is encourage that their family, their friends will come to visit them. And if you design a perfectly safe space that they like but doesn't have anything interesting for the grandkids to, do, or it's not going to encourage them to come. So when it's possible, I like to do an area, it doesn't take that much. You have to have internet and a place to sit that is not fragile and climbable and so on.
Sure.
And so, it's important to have that as one of the considerations. And back to the end. That's it.
Before I talk about this, I just wanted to explain a little bit about my background. I am trained as an architect. I studied environmental design as an undergrad and then did a master's in architecture. And I did that because what was always of interest to me was how people used space. I can think, nobody wants me to design a building, I'll do the plan. Because that's what makes me click, is how's somebody gonna use it, how's it gonna make them feel, how's it gonna work? And then somebody else should put a skin on it, So that, maybe because of that interest, I was always interested in housing and also very interested in affordable housing. When I moved to New York, I joined the housing committee here at the AIA and met a lot of people that way. Affordable housing brought me to senior housing. So I was working at a firm, Gruz & Sampton, where Peter Sampton had done a project for self-help in 1968. And they called him up to talk to him about doing a renovation. And so I got to meet Self-Help by doing a couple projects for them, 2 new buildings and 2 substantial rehabs. So I already knew about housing issues, I knew about urban housing, I understood affordable housing issues, and then here comes another sort of layer of that, which is senior housing, low-income senior housing, and a group that focuses on aging in place. Self-Help is very proud of the fact that only 2% of their residents actually leave the apartment at the end of their lives to go to nursing or something else. 98% of the people die in their apartment is what I'm telling you. And that's a really good thing because they have been able to stay in the place that makes them comfortable, most comfortable, and not have to make that awful transition that if you make it too late can really be very, very difficult for a person. And like you said, plan for it and do it when you still want to do it. So I came to affordable housing and senior housing through that path. But at the same time, in 1990s through to the mid-2000s, my grandparents were aging. They were so old, they were 80, and then they lived into their mid-90s. And I, through caring for them, I saw the challenges that they had in terms of what the options were for them, moving from their home that they've lived in their whole, 60 years of marriage into an apartment. My grandfather developed some dementia, so he was in a facility for a while, but what that did to my grandmother, and then he came back, and it became very personal for me to understand what it was like for a senior to stay in their apartment and the kind of things that, as an architect, that I could actually help with, because I understood physically some of the challenges. So in 2018, I left private practice. I was in private practice for over 30 years. Some of my colleagues are here. I had the opportunity to work with Valerie for over 10 years, which was great. And then I was doing consulting, and then in 2020, Self-Help called and said, I was doing consulting for them, and they said, would you actually like to work full-time? So this was my change in my career from being a practicing architect. I don't even know where my stamp is anymore. I hope it doesn't install it. I don't know. It doesn't matter. To now being on the other side, where I'm on the developer side, and we have a very, sort of specific goal as a mission-driven organization. Self-Help is a New York City area group. Right now we have 17 buildings and about 1,700 units of housing, so just under 2,000 residents. This is our mission statement. Our overarching goal is to enable older adults to live with dignity and independence. And I have to keep telling myself not to say senior citizens, but to say older adults. I say now. But dignity and independence are the two sort of key phrases. So a little bit about Self-Help, and just again, it's a New York City and Long Island practice. That's where all of our developments are. Projects are always they're always income restricted, they're always 62 plus for the head of household, except for the folks that are coming out of the shelter system through programs. HPD has a SARA program, and the state has the ESHI program. So those two programs are specifically for seniors, for older adults, 55 and older. And they're interviewed and brought through the shelter system into this permanently affordable housing for them. I'll explain in a bit how our very specific housing with services has made this some of the challenges of bringing people from a traumatic background into residence. It's, I think, because of our social services, we're uniquely qualified. Many people are qualified, but we have a unique package that we can do. Until very recently, all the projects were just seniors. And then we have an 80-20 where it's 20% seniors. And now we have one that's about to open that's 50-50 families and seniors. And so as people try to figure out how to finance things, different models come forward. And I think that, I actually think this is intergenerational housing is a fine way for people to live. I wish that we only get funding to provide social services for the seniors and not for the other residents of the building, and I think everybody should be able to get the services. There's always a live-in super, that's really important. And if the building's big enough, there's a property manager on site. A lot of times the building's not big enough to support full-time. We have this thing called Shazam, Self-Help Active Services for Aging model, which is basically our aging in place model. It is on-site social services designed to help people to get their entitlements and benefits if they don't have them or don't know about them, help them get home health aid if they need one, provide social interaction and programming. We talk a lot over the last couple of years about health is housing and housing is health. This is the new buzzword, but a lot of things around exercise, nutrition, and socialization. This is, we have 6 buildings in Queens, and it's really hard to look at from here. But they're all, it's at the intersection of Casino Boulevard and 45th Avenue, and they all have a K in front of them because of casino. So K1 is the first building that was built in 1964. That's when Self-Help went from being purely social services organization and mostly volunteer, to actually having staff and starting to build housing. K2 is actually the building that Peter Sampton built in, or designed, as he was the job captain, right, Rob? In 1968. So then other buildings have been built around. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to show you the most recent building, which is being built in the backyard of those 3 buildings, because we're going for a reduction in parking based on the new CQA zoning. There's also a health center and a senior center over there. Projects are mostly between 30 and 70% of AMI, area median income. This is the chart for Sumner Houses, which is first person is going to move in about 2 weeks, where the income is capped at 50% of AMI. You can see a studio unit can have 1 or 2 people living in it. A 1-bedroom unit can have up to 3 people living in it. This is the other key piece of information. That's a maximum income for the household, but if your income is, I don't know, $10,000 a year, you're not going to pay more than $3,000 a year in rent. So you got to get in. Based on the income limits, you can't have assets over $80,000, which is, means you need this housing. And then you've got that cap in terms of how much you pay in rent. So I'm in the sometimes unenviable position of being that architect that shows up in the room with the people that have gone all the way through CDs, and then all of a sudden Self-Help comes in, and now we're the social services provider, and we're asking them to redesign stuff because they have to follow our design guidelines. So it's not bad enough that as you're building, you've got city design guidelines and state design guidelines, and you've got enterprise green communities. All the affordable housing projects have that sustainability overlay, and now a lot of our projects have a passive house overlay. Then I come in, and my colleague Allison, and we try to train people in how the programs function in the spaces in order to get to a building that will work for residents. As I said before, I think about buildings from the inside out, so that is really how the guideline has been developed. We look at in a perfect world, this guideline is given to an architect before they start working on the project, but that has not yet been the case. I've only been there 3.5 years, so hopefully at some point it'll be the case, but it's not been the case. We take drawings that are, maybe they're already on a building department, and maybe HPD's already approved them, and go back in and start asking for things. And things that are listed here are the absolute gotta have it. There's no getting around roll-in showers. We're not going to accept the 10% of roll-in, and the others are bathtubs, and goes back to your 80% of the falls. The emergency pull cord is one that really a lot of people don't want to do, but it is something that it's a pull cord in the bathroom. You've seen them sometimes in bathrooms. In our system, there's one in the bedroom on the bed wall, and there's one in the bathroom down low. It triggers when you pull it a light outside your apartment door that has a strobe element to it, so it attracts attention, not a noise, but strobe, so that your neighbors will know that maybe you're in distress. It also, in the superintendent's apartment, there's a panel that says, 2A is in trouble, and in the lobby, same thing. And it doesn't go anywhere else. It doesn't go to fire department, doesn't go to any offsite. It's just a way for the social services and your neighbors to be clued into that you might need help. this furnishability, that's probably the biggest thing that we are challenged with aside from community spaces is apartments that into which you cannot put a bed, a dresser, dining table, even no matter how small, and a lounge chair. It meets, it's pushed all the other buttons, it meets code and all this stuff, but there's only one place to put the bed, and that's looking right at the kitchen. Or, some other way that's, if you don't want to live that way, you can be sure nobody else does, so just figure it out. Public hallways, we always have handrails on one side at least. This adequate lighting is a big one. Because right now in residential, there's such a desire for this like really low lighting, and it might be code, but you can't see where you're going. And we insist on recessed areas for seats. If the hallway is more than 75 feet from the elevator, that there be a place for people to stop. The community rooms vary in size, but it's really this thing about having a meeting of all the building residents, 70% of them call a building meeting and 70% of them need to be able to fit in the room. That's kind of the criteria. We also like to be able to divide that into smaller rooms. That community room is used for presentations. Somebody will come in and give a presentation. The social worker will have a tenant meeting. There's movies on Fridays at lunchtime with popcorn, whatever. There's social events that relate to that use of that community room. Having a sink that you can do arts and crafts and then not ruin the sink by putting your paint in it. A storage closet that's big enough to put all the tables and chairs away, because the rooms have to really be multifunctional. And we started over the last couple of years adding computer stations, like more, depending on the size of the building, 2 or 3, a computer for residents to use, residents who just don't have one in their apartment, and who may need some help getting on, and we have a system where we help people get access to the internet for whatever they need. Lobbies, again, seating for 15% of the residents, that's like a real, I always get pushback on that one, but actually between people waiting for a Cessa ride, waiting for a family, just hanging out, it's really not that many people. A lot of people do like to come down and wait for the mailman and just kind of hang out. And then the social worker's office should be visible from that lobby. Like, the social worker should be able to see sort of who's coming and going and have casual interaction with the residents. If the social worker's, downstairs or upstairs or somewhere, they're not actually having that casual interaction the same way, and that's pretty important. The number of social workers in the building, it depends on the funding and like which program is funding it and how many people are in the building, but it's always at least one full-time social worker. That's the smallest building. We have one that's about to open that's going to have 9 social workers because it's 140 residents, and they're all coming out of the shelter system. And I guess the last thing mentioned is, outdoor space, whether it's roof deck, although nobody wants to go on a high roof. So roof deck, if it can be on a lower roof, the front yard, the backyard, access to places just to sit, but also we do have a fairly robust relationship with a group called the HORT, which is New York State Horticultural Society. And they come in and they do plantings, but they also can do programs with our residents. So, teaching people how to grow herbs, and then what you do with the herbs, and making soap from things that they grow in the garden and that sort of thing. I'm just going to show you a couple of projects quickly. We've had the opportunity to work with Studio Daniel Libeskind twice This project opened first, but it was the second one that was designed. Very new design with a single and a quarter. You can see an open courtyard in the middle, and very unusual shape, so every apartment's different. This also thankfully was, the zoning required 1-bedroom, 600 square foot apartments, so everybody got a nice 1-bedroom apartment. And the single loaded quarter, you know, when I first saw the drawings, I thought, oh God, how are we gonna finance that? But you know, the pull of having Daniel Lipscomb design something means that some people are willing to pay more money. State agencies I'm talking about. This is the one that's about to open. This is a NYCHA campus in Bedford-Stuyvesant. Again, a single loaded quarter around a center atrium. This case, it's 10 stories high, so it's got a skylight on it. And that space is really, it's really fabulous. I can't wait until we have our our ribbon cutting next month, and you can actually, you're not supposed to see these pictures. The Lord came in and did the plantings, and it looks amazing. And I mean, as you can see, the building is, it's crazy. It's very different. A lot of the apartments are very different because of curving walls and things like that. But fabulous opportunity. This project, I think I put it in here because it's really hard to find land to build affordable housing, and senior housing is no different. And so this was, the Albanese organization has this master plan for Wyandanch at the LIRR train station, which is right here. And there's a huge LIRR parking garage, 5-story high parking garage. This senior housing building wraps around it. So now it looks like that instead of looking like a parking garage. It's not the optimal thing to have an elevator here and to have apartments down a 120-foot hallway, but they're nice apartments, and it was able to be built. It's permanently affordable.
And you have a bench halfway.
That's right. Got my bench. Last thing I'm going to show you is this is newest project that we're right now with the community board. Trying to get permission, 3 existing buildings, 270 apartments, current parking ratio 30% because it was built when that was the parking ratio for senior housing. Now, through ZQA, it's 10%, but we have to go through a special permit process to get the 270 apartments will now have 27 parking spaces, and that gave us the land, which otherwise we would not be able to build this project. But the project will be, on the campus, and it's designed by Curtis Ginsberg. We're great to work with, and Matthews Nielsen did the landscape design. Oops. I'm pointing at things, so there we go. That's it.
Thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. We get to learn what interested you when you were young and took you to Design for Aging. And also for so many different kinds of all amazing projects from different perspectives. They're all designed for aging. It's wonderful. Thank you. I think before we open the question to the audience, I only have one question that maybe we can all talk about. It's how do you see the approach of Design for Aging has changed over time, and how do you see the future of Design for Aging? Maybe Suzanne can start.
When you first asked us this question, you said before COVID. What did COVID change?
Yeah, right.
And I think there are 2 big things that COVID changed in terms of Design for Aging. A lot of people were isolated socially during COVID, and that condition of living alone, not being able to go outside, not being able to see your friends, a lot of that is very similar to the isolation that seniors can feel. And I think suddenly all of society kind of, there were either people who were like really happy and got a puppy, or they were on that other side. And so people learned that, that was a real thing. Social isolation, being stuck at home, was a real thing. The other thing they learned was that it's not that hard to use Zoom. People didn't know what Zoom was. And self-help had a program, or still has a program called Virtual Senior Center, which is basically Zoom that we were doing for years. And now all of a sudden everybody got it. Like, you can communicate and you can do things over this tool. So I think technology, Zoom, helped. The boomers are getting older. They are not going to put up with nonsense. They're not. They're going to demand things get fixed. So I think that's the future.
Great, thank you. A lot of good.
Yeah, I gave that some thought, particularly because I thought that COVID was such a sea change in terms of the dangers of congregate living and the dangers of non-congregate living. And how do we balance that is really a serious issue going forward, that certainly our generation will never forget that experience. Although, hopefully we won't go through that again. But, I think that, to second what Susan said about technology, I think that the boomers have enough comfort with technology that it will keep evolving and offering us more. I mean, I know that I've had things, photo monitors that you can just upload photos from wherever you are. And, during COVID, I spent 2 months living with my parents who were in the 90s because they needed help. And, it was really fascinating. They'd come downstairs and see the photo that was up that day my brother would have loaded of their great-grandchildren. That was enough. That made them so happy. And it's, it's not that hard. It's just that we don't have it built into our culture yet in a way that people are comfortable with. And I think, Zoom and whatever are the later versions will help a lot. I hope that we can make it more possible for people to have real choices between aging in place, even if it's failing them, and choosing, what suits their personality and their lifestyle.
Well, I think technology is a big part of it. I think that technology also enables people to stay where they are. And I think COVID, in many ways, what we heard anecdotally from some of the larger providers that we work with is that in some cases, people that weren't ready to make a change, all of a sudden, even though they had the technology to enable them to stay in place and maybe the financial wherewithal to stay where they are and make adaptations in their apartments, really wanted to be in a congregate setting. But I think, we had several projects on the board during that time that stopped for obvious reasons. And we redesigned, particularly dining, we redesigned like 4 times because everybody had to be apart and everybody didn't have to be apart. But I think things, we're all sitting here without masks on, right? So things sort of started to go back to normal, if there's ever a normal. But I think one of the things that hung around was this concept of takeout. There's still some, even though you want to be in the congregate setting in case you need it, there's still a sense of independence. So shifting maybe some of the norms of how we planned for larger congregate residential living with some new flares and twists built in.
So I think we can open up for 1 or 2 questions.
Maybe I can. Question to Gail. I remember you had a project to recreate a apartment in New Jersey, Florida. It's for dementia person. And can you explain how you did it and how you feel now after many years?
If I am connecting to the right thing, it was when I moved a couple from Florida to New Jersey. It was a really, it was a wonderful experience in a lot of ways because they were my friend's parents, and it was the only project that felt like it looks on TV when they do these redo and then walk in. But we had to do it a certain way because her dad was legally blind, her mom had dementia, and we went down there one weekend and I surveyed everything and I laid it all out for the new apartment. And then one of the family members went and got them and flew them up, and we were waiting in the apartment like, please let this work. And I had taken meticulous photos of each of the little doodad things that were in cases so that I could set them up as closely as possible to the Florida thing, because blindness and dementia, you just want as much to be the same as possible. So I did it, and she walked in and she said, oh, we're home. And we were all crying. It was just like, it was a really nice thing. And they stayed there until they passed away. He was like 103. Wow. So, can't do much better than that. Thank you for remembering that.
Thanks. Just following up on what is different, what's changed over the last decade or more. In this building down in the basement, the ADAPT NYC competition, micro-unit competition, so-called, was launched. And the winner, Mimi Wong and Barry Lundy from Penn Architects, won that competition based on a unit size that was 300 square feet, which was designed mostly for seniors, but also for students and other people living alone, and was predicated on a kind of co-housing mentality to a degree where there would be more congregate space. I think, Susan, you may have been chair of the housing committee that preceded.
No, but I remember the exhibit.
And I saw Eric and Mimi recently and asked, apart from the Carmel project, not too far from where that was actually built, why didn't the idea of the micro-unit catch on, from 10, 12 years ago? And they said, well, COVID really did a number on it because you couldn't have the congregate dining space that co-housing or something similar to it predicates. And people who were isolating or isolated in their own apartments wanted them bigger. And we saw lots of examples of people living in, whether it was a family member or someone supporting. Just wondering if any of you, have thoughts on unit size, because that wasn't discussed as it relates to people living alone or with the living. They will have privacy to have someone there through the night. I've lived that with elderly relatives myself, and how that works. And just what are the trade-offs?
Right. I have always thought capital housing was inexplicably not successful here, because to me that would be wonderful. I would love co-housing. I like the idea of someone else making dinner, and I like the idea and being able to leave and go into my room, and and I think it's economically and environmentally desirable. It would allow for multi-generational, even if they're not your own relatives, which might even be better. Seriously, because people don't really want to live, and go to the dining room necessarily. It depends on what stage you're at in your life, but, if somebody doesn't have a family, it's wonderful to be around somebody else's kids and then go back to your room and close the door, or, have the notion of socialization coming naturally. So I don't know enough about that, but I think that it would be I'd love to see that promoted.
The newest HPD guidelines, I'm looking at Candy because you've probably drawn something. I mean, the push for counting the number of units and building more units has led to the apartments being quite small. I think in that Sumner building, some of the units are 310 square feet. I mean, it has to be done right, otherwise I'm gonna be sitting in your bed looking at this refrigerator. So it has to be done carefully, but it's a challenge, right? Figuring out how to.
Well, also the funding, and the funding really makes developers need to make the numbers work. It always seems like there needs to be a maximum of studios, right?
Because the rent that you get on the studio is like $30 less than the rent you get on the one bedroom.
Right. Which is tough. But there are models that are being developed. Christine really.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think from having, Kim and I used to work together for quite a few years. I think, and did quite a few senior projects struggling with those HPD maximums, sometimes and minimums. But I think what's lacking sometimes in the design of those projects is a Gail who really thinks about the interior furnishings, because in fact, I really believe some of HPD's own furnishing plans don't work. And specifically don't work for older people with walkers or, God forbid, a wheelchair who actually have to get around the bed or get around two sides of the bed. So that I find those unit sizes, to me, unrealistic functionally, but and what you were saying about your self-help standards on top of HPD standards sounds to me really useful, because I know just architects, they don't really think about it. The very junior people in the office just sort of put in these furnishing plans at the last minute because they're required in the in the submission, and nobody really looks at them. So I think there are real issues with those tiny apartments.
And I would just say, certainly with HPD guidelines, affordable housing, unit size, it's not that much different necessarily with a for-profit developer that has a pro forma, and the apartments need to be a certain size to make everything work. Sometimes the for-profit side is as tight as the not-for-profit or affordable side. And I think also later on top of that, culturally, where we are living, particularly here in the U.S., it's not sort of part of this idea of co-housing is not part of our cultural norm. That Camp Hill project, they do have co-housing, and they have workers that live in the residences above. Richard knew when that was built, but what we learned in working with them again is that they're having a hard time finding people to live and work in the co-housing, so they're sort of reimagining, if they expand the assisted living, what would co-housing look like today? Who would live, and one of the complaints they're having from the people that are actually living there that want to engage in that lifestyle is that the units are too small. So I think it is part of our culture also that sort of fights against this idea of minimal lifestyle.
Yeah, 7:59.
Let's wrap up with the last question. Can you give us some advice for those who are interested in design for aging, or who want to know how to integrate design for aging in their design thinking? Any advice?
So I thought about this a lot. I think, and some of your other, I'm going to sort of combine my answer. One of your questions was, why do you stay? I didn't come to this field saying, I want to design for an aging population. But that first project I worked on, St. Joseph's Social Line, really touched my heart when the nursing home administrator said to me, we moved these residents over into their new spaces. They were bigger, they were full of light, and there were people talking and looking around, and like their whole personalities changed. And for me, that was a transformational moment. I mean, I like doing an office every once in a while, but it doesn't touch my heart in the same way. So I also think an important part as people move through their career is to find something that touches your heart, but also find good mentors. And for me, a lot of them are sitting in this room. I mean, Susan and Rich and other people that I've worked with, and everybody brings their own unique perspective. Some of it is a female perspective from a caregiving perspective. Some of it is, a passion about providing services. Some of it is a passion about providing good design. And that could mean a lot of things. It could mean something that is aesthetically beautiful. It could be something that's functional for the operator. It could be some, project that pencils out and, it's a lot of different things, and you pick those things up from whoever will listen to you and talk to you and, help you find that information.
Thank you.
My advice is similar to Valerie's. You have to enjoy it because it's not easy. And I think that's architecture, right? So, if what excites you about architecture is how people use space, or if what excites you about architecture is what the building looks like, then do that. Because life is too short to do stuff that's not interesting to you. And yeah, find your mentors.
Yeah, I think it's somewhat repetitive, so I won't say those things, but I think that for me, I have always been most interested in what can space do to affect people and people's lives. And there's so much in this work that does that, and I think it, along with maybe the other end of it, which would be, for children, I think affects people's lives the most because it's the most vulnerable part of life. And, I've really enjoyed it. And I think if anyone is interested, there's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done. I mean, I took down my website, I was saying, because I was like, I don't want anybody to call me, I'm a sole practitioner, and it's like, I think it's really remarkable, and it's interesting, and it operates on all different scales, so, you have to go for what speaks to you. And join the AI Design for Aging Committee. And the Women in Design Committee.
Thank you so much.